24th of January 1944. SS Oberfuhrer Herbert Otto Gille stood in the command bunker of the 5th SS Panzer Division Wiking, studying the maps of the Korsun Salient on the Dnieper Bend. His division was Hitler's international showcase, the Nordic Spearhead, built around Dutch volunteers of the Westland Regiment and Germanic troops of the Germania Regiment. These were not conscripts or desperate late-war recruits. These were ideological warriors who had driven to the Caucasus in 1942, who had held the Mius River against Stalin's best. The Heeresgruppe Süd directive was clear. The division is designated Mobile Reserve for Gruppe Stemmermann, immediate employment against enemy penetrations west of Korsun-Shevchenkovskoye. German intelligence assessed Soviet forces as capable of only local probes. The salient could be held. The Red Army lacked the strength for full encirclement. Before we dive into what happened next, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from today. And if you've got family stories from the Second World War or you've visited any of these Eastern Front battlefields, I'd love to hear about that too. These stories connect across generations in ways that still matter. Gille had no idea that in 24 days, his elite Panzer division would be annihilated. The Nordic Spearhead would abandon every tank, every assault gun, every truck in the freezing waters of the Niloy-Tikich River. Wiking would cease to exist as a fighting force, its survivors stumbling into German lines as broken remnants of what had once been the Waffen-SS mystique made flesh. The trap was already closing. While Gille positioned his panzers as a mobile reserve, Army General Nikolai Vatutin commanded the 1st Ukrainian front massing north of the salient. To the south, Army General Ivan Konev's 2nd Ukrainian Front prepared for the largest encirclement operation since Stalingrad. The Soviets had learned the art of the cauldron from bitter experience. Now they would turn it against the Wehrmacht with industrial precision. The Red Army buildup was staggering. 336,700 personnel, 524 tanks, 5,300 guns, 2 complete tank armies, the 5th Guards under Lieutenant General Pavel Rotmistrov and the 6th under Lieutenant General Andrei Kravchenko. This was not a local probe. This was deep battle doctrine perfected. The breakthrough echelon followed by exploitation forces designed to shatter German defenses and race to encirclement objectives before the Wehrmacht could react. To understand why the Germans missed this buildup, we have to talk about Maskirovka. This was Soviet military deception raised to an art form. Fake radio traffic simulated the 4th Guards Army redeploying north, while the real assault forces moved into position. Dummy tank parks built from plywood and straw bales fooled German aerial reconnaissance. Rotmistrov's 250 tanks massed in birch groves under camouflage nets, invisible to the Junkers 88 reconnaissance flights that reported only minor activity. The Soviets had learned to hide armies in plain sight. Fremde Heere Ost, German military intelligence, fell completely for the deception. Their summary to Heeresgruppe Süd on January 22nd read, "Enemy operations limited to local attacks, no indications of major offensive preparation against Korsun Bulge." The intelligence failure was total. German commanders from Manstein down to division level planned for scattered probes, not the hammer blow that was about to fall. The weather worked against the Germans. January thaw had turned the black earth of Ukraine into Rasputitsa, the season of mud that swallowed vehicles and trapped infantry. Roads became rivers of boot-sucking mire. Then the temperature dropped again, coating everything in treacherous ice. German mobility, the foundation of Blitzkrieg doctrine, was crippled before the battle began. At 0400 hours on January 24th, Soviet artillery opened fire. 5,300 guns spoke at once across a front of 60 kilometers. The barrage lasted 90 minutes, pulverizing German forward positions and severing communication lines. In the gray dawn light, T-34 tanks rolled forward through the smoke and snow, their tracks grinding over frozen earth as rifle divisions advanced behind them. The breakthrough came faster than anyone expected. The 389th Infantry Division, holding the junction between the 11th and 47th Panzer Corps, simply disintegrated under the assault. Soviet tank corps poured through the gap like water through a broken dam. By noon, lead elements of the 20th Tank Corps had advanced 15 kilometers into the German rear. Gille received the emergency order at 1400 hours. Wiking was to abandon its reserve position, and plugged the gap northwest of Korsun. The division's Panzer regiment, 25 tanks operational, raced through mud and slush toward the sound of the guns. They found chaos. German infantry streamed rearward in disorder. Soviet tanks appeared and disappeared in the fog like steel ghosts. The first clash came at a nameless village 5 kilometers from Korsun. Wiking's lead company, 8 Panzer IVs, engaged a column of T-34s emerging from a tree line. The range was point-blank, less than 400 meters. German gunners fired first, their 75mm rounds punching through Soviet armor. But for every T-34 that burned, 2 more appeared. The Soviets had numbers. The Germans had skill. In the mud and confusion, skill was not enough. By evening on January 24th, Wiking had lost 6 tanks and 800 men. The division was committed, locked into the salient as Soviet pincers began their race to encirclement. There would be no withdrawal, no redeployment to better positions. The Nordic Spearhead was trapped in the closing jaws of the Soviet offensive. January 28th marked the end of German hopes. At 1600 hours, forward detachments of Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army linked up with Kravchenko's 6th Tank Army at Zvenigorodka. The pincer snapped shut. 60,000 German troops were trapped in a pocket 15 kilometers long and 8 kilometers wide. Among them was the entire 5th SS Panzer Division Wiking. The encirclement was textbook deep battle doctrine. The breakthrough echelon had shattered German defenses. Now the exploitation echelon raced to objectives deep in the German rear, cutting supply lines and escape routes. Soviet tank commanders had studied German blitzkrieg tactics and learned to execute them better than their teachers. Gille's situation was desperate. His division was down to 20 operational tanks from the original 60. Ammunition was running low, fuel was critically short. The Korsun airfield, the pocket's lifeline to the outside world, was under constant Soviet artillery fire. Transport planes could barely land, and when they did, they carried wounded out rather than supplies in. The weather turned worse. Temperatures dropped to minus 20 degrees centigrade. Wind whipped snow across the steppe, reducing visibility to meters. German soldiers, many without winter clothing, began to freeze. Frostbite casualties mounted. Horses were slaughtered for food as rations dwindled. To understand how an encirclement kills a formation, we have to talk about the anatomy of collapse. First goes the airfield, cutting off supply and evacuation. Then radio communication fails as batteries die and equipment freezes. Command breaks down. Units lose contact with headquarters and with each other. Rationing fails as supply dumps are overrun or abandoned. Medical care collapses as aid stations are evacuated or destroyed. Finally, unit cohesion disintegrates as soldiers focus on individual survival rather than collective defense. Wiking experienced every stage of this collapse over the next 2 weeks. The Korsun airfield fell on February 2nd, cutting the division's link to resupply. Radio contact with Heeresgruppe Süd became sporadic, then ceased entirely. The divisional aid station was evacuated on February 5th as Soviet artillery zeroed in on the pocket's shrinking perimeter. Soviet pressure was relentless. Konev's 2nd Ukrainian Front compressed the pocket from the south, while Vatutin's 1st Ukrainian Front squeezed from the north. Every day brought new attacks, new penetrations, new demands to shift Wiking's dwindling armor to shore up collapsing sectors. The division was being bled white in a dozen small actions, each one chipping away at its combat strength. February 10th brought the worst crisis yet. Soviet infantry, supported by Il-2 Sturmovik ground attack aircraft, broke through the pocket's northern perimeter. Gille committed his last reserve, a Kampfgruppe built around the Germania regiment's surviving companies. The counterattack succeeded in sealing the breach, but at terrible cost. Germania lost 300 men in 6 hours of fighting. 300 men gone in a single morning. By February 13th, Wiking was no longer a panzer division in anything but name. The last operational Panzer force had been abandoned in the mud, their fuel exhausted and their crews reassigned as infantry. The division's artillery was down to 8 guns from the original 36. Truck transport had virtually ceased to exist. The Nordic Spearhead had become a collection of rifle companies armed with whatever weapons they could scrounge. Outside the pocket, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein was mounting a desperate relief operation. The 3rd Panzer Corps under General Hermann Breith had been assembled from divisions pulled off other sectors of the front. 11,000 men, 120 tanks, racing against time to break through to the trapped forces at Korsun. The relief attack began on February 11th. Bryth's panzers advanced from Lysyanka, 20 kilometers southwest of the pocket. Initial progress was good. German tanks overran Soviet outposts and captured key terrain features. For a brief moment, it seemed the relief might succeed. But the Soviets had prepared for this contingency. Rotmistrov's tank army, freed from encirclement duties by the pocket's compression, turned to face the relief force. Soviet engineers destroyed bridges across the Niloy-Tikich River and mined the approaches to Lysyanka. Every kilometer cost Bryth tanks he could not afford to lose. By February 15th, the relief attack had stalled. Bryth's corps was down to 60 operational tanks and had advanced only 12 kilometers. The gap between the relief force and the pocket remained 8 kilometers of Soviet-held territory bristling with anti-tank guns and dug-in infantry. Time was running out. Inside the pocket, General Lieutenant Wilhelm Stemmermann, commanding Gruppe Stemmermann, made the decision that would doom Wiking. Unable to wait for relief that might never come, he ordered a mass breakout for the night of February 16th. Every remaining German soldier in the pocket would attempt to fight their way out in a single desperate charge. The breakout plan was simple in concept, suicidal in execution. Wiking's remaining armor, 12 Panzer IVs and 8 assault guns, would spearhead the attack. Behind them, 30,000 German infantry would follow in a column stretching for kilometers. The objective was the Gniloy-Tikich River and the hope of linking up with Bryth's relief force on the far bank. At 2200 hours on February 16th, the breakout began. Gille led from the front, his command tank grinding through snow and mud toward the Soviet lines. Behind him, the remnants of the Westland and Germania regiments fixed bayonets and prepared for the charge of their lives. The Soviets were waiting. Rotmistrov had positioned his tanks in ambush positions along the breakout route. Artillery had been pre-registered on likely crossing points. Machine gun nests covered every approach to the river. The 5th Guards Cavalry Corps, 5,000 sabres strong, was positioned to exploit any breakthrough and slaughter German infantry in the open. The collision was catastrophic. Wiking's lead tanks ran straight into a wall of anti-tank fire. Soviet 76mm guns, hidden in the tree line, opened up at point-blank range. German armor burned in the snow as T-34 tanks emerged from concealment to finish off the survivors. Gille's own tank was hit twice before reaching the river. He abandoned the burning vehicle and continued on foot, leading his men into the icy water of the Niloy-Tikich. The current was stronger than expected, swollen by the January thaw. Men in heavy winter clothing disappeared beneath the surface, dragged down by their equipment. Those who made it across the river faced the cavalry charge. Lieutenant General Vasily Parkhomenko's 5th Guards Cavalry Corps struck the German column like a thunderbolt. Cossack sabers rose and fell in the moonlight as horses trampled fleeing infantry. The sound of the charge, thousands of hooves pounding frozen earth, could be heard for kilometers. The war diary of the 5th SS Panzer Division Wiking, entry for February 17th, reads, "Division destroyed in breakout attempt. All armor abandoned at river crossing. Personnel strength approximately 4,000 from original 16,000. Regiments Westland and Germania no longer combat effective. 4,000 survivors from 16,000 men." The destruction was total. Wiking abandoned every tank, every assault gun, every truck, every piece of heavy equipment in the mud and ice of the Niloy-Tikich. The division that had spearheaded the drive to the Caucasus, that had held the Mias River against Stalin's best, ceased to exist as a fighting formation. Soviet records tell the other side of the story. The Second Ukrainian Front reported the capture of 11,500 German prisoners, including 2,000 from Wiking. 72 German tanks were confirmed destroyed in the pocket fighting. The Nordic Spearhead, Hitler's international showcase, had been annihilated in 24 days of encirclement warfare. The survivors who reached German lines were broken men. Frostbitten, starving, traumatized by the slaughter they had witnessed, they bore little resemblance to the elite warriors who had entered the Korsun Salient 3 weeks earlier. Many would never fight again. The Waffen-SS mystique of invincible Nordic warriors died in the freezing waters of an obscure Ukrainian river. The destruction of Wiking at Korsun opened the floodgates for Soviet operations across Ukraine. With the Dnieper salient eliminated, Vatutin's First Ukrainian Front could advance toward the Carpathian Mountains. Konev's Second Ukrainian Front turned south toward Romania and the Ploiești oil fields. The Wehrmacht's mobile reserves, already stretched thin, could not be everywhere at once. Field Marshal von Manstein, architect of German victory at Kharkov and defender of the Dnieper Line, was relieved of command on March 30th. His mobile defense doctrine, dependent on elite formations like Wiking, had been shattered by Soviet deep battle tactics. The Eastern Front would never recover its equilibrium. The survivors of Wiking were withdrawn to Poland for refit and rebuilding. But the division never regained its pre-Korsun strength or effectiveness. The Nordic volunteers, Dutch and Norwegian and Germanic, had been the core of its identity. Most were dead in Ukrainian mud or marching to Soviet prison camps. The replacements were German teenagers and foreign conscripts who lacked both the training and the fanaticism of the original formation. For the Red Army, Korsun was validation of everything they had learned since Stalingrad. Deep battle doctrine worked. Maskirovka worked. Tank armies could execute encirclements as efficiently as German Panzer Corps once had. The student had become the master. The battle also marked the beginning of the end for SS prestige on the Eastern Front. Wiking had been the showcase division, proof that Hitler's racial theories could produce superior soldiers. Its destruction at Korsun exposed the reality behind the propaganda. Elite training and ideological fervor were no match for superior numbers, better intelligence, and sound operational doctrine. SS Oberfuhrer Herbert Otto Gille, who had stood in his command bunker on January 24th, confident in his division's ability to handle Soviet probes, ended the war as a prisoner in Soviet hands. The Nordic Spearhead he had commanded with such pride was scattered across the battlefields of Ukraine, its survivors haunted by memories of the Niloi Tikit crossing. The 5th SS Panzer Division. Wiking entered the Korsun Salient as Hitler's international showcase, 16,000 strong with 60 tanks and the reputation of an elite formation. 24 days later, it ceased to exist. The Nordic Spearhead had been annihilated by the Red Army's mastery of encirclement warfare, its destruction clearing the path for Soviet offensives that would carry the hammer and sickle to the gates of Berlin.